Well, good afternoon. It is awesome to be with you today, and I have some great news about a wonderful event that's happening in our family on Friday evening from 5 to 8. Walk this way, and it is being coordinated and led by David Witwer, who is an active member of our church and has helped lead us in a number of different ways, from kinfolk to some of the worship services we've done, and has always been such a gift to help us see and experience God in different ways. And I just really appreciate him and his presence, the presence of his family in our church. And David is with me today. So David, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah. So I am really intrigued about this event, and it's the first of 4 events, as I understand it. Friday is from 5 to 8, as I said. You don't need a reservation, don't need a ticket, drop on in. And it's going to be a way to encounter God in a fresh way. And so maybe, David, tell us a little bit about kind of what's happening in this, what you have in store for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The first day is Friday, which is very soon, which is exciting. It's been in the works for a while, so this is a cool moment. And Saturday as well. So we're kind of getting everything front loaded. So Friday, Saturday, and then next weekend the 7th or the 8th and the 9th, Friday and Saturday again, 5 to 8. So everybody's got opportunities.
All 4 of the Reeves campus.
All 4 at the Reeves campus. Okay. Yep. You show up, bring yourself, bring somebody else. Don't need tickets, nothing else. So, yes, this is something new for me. We can talk about more about kind of where this came from and came out of. I'm excited about it and sort of how just what we can imagine. Hopefully, kind of just seeing. Something like this that I haven't really been a part of. I haven't seen exactly. It's sort of a unique thing for myself, as well as something I'm really excited about. It is, to give a little bit, it's hard to fully explain something that is designed to be unique, right? So I've been running into that this whole time. Sure. But it is, it's at the meeting place. This is a good way to say it, it's at the meeting place of art and contemplation and ministry. In my life, those 3 things have been converging for a while. And this is another kind of fruit of that, where we're able to, using an art form, particularly video art. So I've worked in film and video for years. I've made short film, narrative films, worked on some documentary kind of films. This is something different because there's no narrative, there's no characters. It's just a scene. It's actually just one shot. But this is a medium that I sort of discovered in the last year, and I'm really excited about the possibilities for it. And that is really the centerpiece, is this video piece, which is this encounter really designed to be a bit of a sacred space. I don't say that lightly. That is really the intention. And that's something that certainly I've experienced in my own life, in films, in other artworks, in nature. Like so many spaces and experiences are charged with the presence of God for me. That's something that sustains me. Yeah. And this is an attempt to open the door to, an experience that's meant to be very presenceful, very spirit filled. So we're kind of opening that up, and we'll see how the Spirit moves. We're hopeful, but that's the centerpiece. But there's other things as well. From the time that you park and arrive, and we welcome you, until the time that you go through, it's probably about logistically like a 20 to 30 minute experience. So there's multiple phases. There's walking. There's an audio story. There's some fabric panels. That's a completely new medium for me. There's this video room, which is really the centerpiece, but there's also a response as well. And there's about 8-foot tree that's been built, which is part of this response, which is really, I think, going to be something really, really kind of special to make things come alive in the 3-dimensional space. So there's a lot of pieces kind of from, when you arrive until you go, but it's all in a same theme. It's still asking similar questions and inviting you into it. But, come with an open mind, certainly, because that is really the point. But that's part of the design as well, is to to make you feel welcome from the get-go, because everyone is welcome. I really want this to be for everyone. That's partly why we're doing it at the Reeves Center rather than in a gallery or something that's more, kind of like elite and off to the side, and people have had bad experience. That's not for them. They maybe will do some church things. Like that kind of separation doesn't work for me. And I'm trying to bring everything together in a space that welcomes everyone. So we'll see if we can accomplish that.
Yeah, I've been down to Reeves and I've seen some of the preparation. It looks amazing. The tree looks fantastic, and I love that.
Yeah.
So I know it's going to be special, and I know from your work with us in the past that you have a great way of inviting us into new experiences. And so tell me a little bit about. I want to get back to this sacred space thing.
Sure.
That really resonated with me, David. Actually, this sense of having a sacred space, particularly in this season, is really powerful. And I want to get back to the question about art and medium. But tell me a little bit about when I've gone through this encounter or this experience, and of course the spirit is so critical, right? So I'm hoping I've gone through this. What do you want me, or what are you hoping I'll walk away with?
Yeah, well, I would call this a guided meditation.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been careful, hopefully, not to overplay my hand or overdetermine what your experience is, because I don't know what you're bringing into the space.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is that you need to hear or
blows where the spirit wishes, right? Not direct.
That's certainly the goal. Is that this is an encounter. I don't know. I mean, it's an encounter with God. With this, you don't know exactly what that will be for each person. Right. But there are ways to maybe make things more, to ease things along, be kind of a catalyst to create a space that is generative that sort of makes that possible and expands possibilities. But a lot of it comes home. The first phase, essentially, there's the really high level design. The first phase is really a preparatory. It's really the journey inward. And it is kind of starting to silence some of the things that you're bringing with you, starting to move outside of a familiar space. I think a lot of our church family may not even have been to Reeves, or has only been kind of once, and it's been in various, construction phases. That certainly helps. It doesn't matter how many times I go there. Every time I go into the hallways, I get lost, and that's great because we're feeding people into this little kind of semi-labyrinth. It's really a fascinating feature that I loved about being able to be there. But the whole beginning is your own journey inward. So you're walking, you have a story that you're listening to, and it's just for you. You have headphones, and you're hearing and you're walking. And so you're moving kind of inward. You're leaving behind what you've come from. Mm-hmm. Then the video is really this encounter that you've sort of been prepared, and maybe have a sense of, you're feeling a little more open and a little bit more patient, but you don't know what's going to happen, and I don't know exactly what's going to happen in that room, but it's not what you expect, I think, and I don't know exactly where that will go. And that's the sort of experience, thinking of times in my life where I've had these sort of contemplative encounters, especially through art, but also through meditations and contemplations and all kinds of things. Sometimes they sink in deep, and you don't know what to make of them, and you just forget about it for a while, which I think is what you have to do. And then, but there's sort of that's the seed, and it starts to grow. I had an experience with contemplative prayer in London, and I didn't understand any of it. We just went to a pub afterwards, which was perfect. And about a year or two later, I started thinking about it all the time. And that became, it was actually an examen prayer. And years later, it just kept coming back, and that kind of moved me on this whole journey where then I was starting to study the examen and lead that for different groups at our church. So it can be that sort of a thing too. But I think that when you have an experience like that, that's hard to put into words, or it starts to work on you in ways that you don't understand, ideally you have some sort of an impression that you can crystallize, because otherwise you may just kind of move on from it, or you may not want to go back into that kind of disorienting sort of space inside of you. And so the third part is designed to crystallize at least like one impression, and one, really it's an answer to a question. So once you've gone through all of this, wandering through hallways, kind of wandering through this video scene, you then are presented with a question: what do you do when you lose your way? And you're given a piece of cloth. Actually, you go and you choose and select and untie a piece of cloth, and then you write an answer to that.
Wow.
Just a word or a phrase, not a book.
Right.
It may not be a complete thought either, but you put something down, and then that's what you take to the tree at the end, and you tie it there with everyone else's kind of responses. And so at least when you leave, you've been presented with this question, you have some sort of an answer, and you might think like, wow, maybe you learned something about yourself, maybe you see something brought into relief. Maybe you wrote something down, and a day later you keep thinking about it because you wrote the wrong thing, or you weren't being completely honest, and it's kind of sits with you, and you just keep thinking like, well, what do I actually do? I wrote pray. Like, do I actually pray when I lose my way?
Right.
Should I pray? Like, what does that look like for me? I don't know. Right. So you leave with something that sort of will stick with you in the short term memory and short term experience. But then potentially there's things that get embedded that kind of come into play much later. That's sort of the thing that can happen with these sort of mystical experiences, and but there's kind of moments along the way with this where we're drawing out some of that to the surface so that you're a little bit of a partner for that journey, I think.
That's awesome. That sounds wonderful. I've in my Tuesday small group, we've been doing study on the exam, and we've been doing some readings on prayer.
I love the exam.
And some of the thing that I'm learning is kind of rethinking about the role of prayer, not so much as this thing I do to lay things at God's feet, but to reorient myself. So that it's reorienting myself into one officer, the orbit of God's love. And that's critical. And it means that even if I may not feel like that I've accomplished much, it still is critical as a practice, as a reorientation. And that's really what's kind of coming to mind in what you're talking about. When you talk about contemplative and creating sacred space and having this encounter, what do you think are some of the fundamental parts of being ready for that? I mean, is there something I do to prepare to hear that voice better, or to be in that space better? Or is it just, how would you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, that awareness that you're talking about, a kind of contemplative awareness, which is really, I think, a form of humility, which I think is really where a lot of discipleship starts. So, I've been marketing this as a contemplative journey because it's the best wording I've found. And sort of like church people are like, oh, interesting, contemplative, and non-church people are sort of like, oh, journey,
Right.
So it's sort of intentional, but there's a sense of journey, of traveling, and this is really being sponsored by Center for Creative Discipleship, and certainly in line with our vision.
Absolutely.
Which is always about discipleship as a journey, as a pathways, trails. We've used that kind of language. It's a kind of journey that's not necessarily linear. It's more of a spiral, but it still has a trajectory, right? You kind of come around sometimes, you kind of go backwards sometimes, but you're still moving somewhere. And I think,
why do we think the path is linear?
Yeah, well, we'd like it to be, probably be shorter or something, but it wouldn't be nearly as rich. I think we all know that from a good story, right? Like it has to be some of this, but there's still the sense of like a starting point. And I think this experience is really honing in on that starting point, which one way to talk about it is humility, because it's that moment when you realize that you don't know enough, you aren't self-sufficient, you don't have a perfect backstory, and you're not ultimately in control of everything around you. And that's what I get from daily prayer, contemplative prayer, is that reminder in the morning of you're part of this story, you're empowered in this story, but you're not ultimately writing everything about it. God is God, you're not. You're part of the story God's writing, an essential piece, but there's still kind of a difference in terms of how I tend to think about the authorship of my life. And when you start from there, when you carry that sort of awareness with you, then I think a lot of things start to kind of unlock around you. And it's certainly a different way of journeying and living than we're often taught, both outside of church and even within it. And this experience is really honing in on that, because it is something that is sort of there's some disorienting pieces to it. That's intentional. Because it's really, sometimes you end up getting disoriented whether you like it or not.
Right.
As an art space, it's in some ways a safer space to do that because there's less on the line. You're not, your mortgage isn't at stake, and what decisions you make in this journey. Relationships aren't like on the table, and this sort of, oftentimes in life, that's where we find ourselves when we actually have these moments where we don't know where to go.
Right.
And there's a lot of ways we can react to that, and some of them may be generative of kind of more possibilities because that's something that the Spirit is leading us toward.
Right.
Other times we run the opposite way, like Jonah, right, and we make a mess. This is really essentially, this art space is it's one instance of training of this, really. I mean, it's not necessarily why I'm doing it as if, like this is a master class, like, no, but it is a model. And if you approach this art experience with open hands and open eyes, you may see kind of what can happen when you let something play out and try to see where the Spirit is moving within it rather than trying to completely articulate it. So like this posture that we're talking about, this contemplative posture, like that is, you have to really come to that place for this art experience to unlock for you. Otherwise it'll sort of be just another kind of weird thing. But if you let it play out, even just for a minute, especially in the video room, if you really just kind of let it be, and it's asking you to, it's really inviting you to, it really wants you to, and hopefully that makes you want to do something that maybe you don't do in your normal life. And it starts to open up. And that's the kind of thing that we have to learn how to do kind of in ordinary spaces in everyday life. Another reason to be in Reeves is in the middle of a neighborhood. And as people like going about their everyday life, like I've been installing pieces of people walking their dogs around, we have to start to think about discipleship right next door, like right where we live.
In the midst of life, not us,
in the midst of everything with all of its different concerns. If we can't learn how to
sacred space in the midst of my life. Now, that's clearly what the journey is about, right? So I love, I just love how you were so intentional, and I can see now how Reeves would be so set up for this, just from the layout and the mystery.
It does a lot.
This is all metaphor and real for us in our middle of life, this contemplative journey. And so coming with humility and openness, kind of open mind, open hands, would be that's amazing. One last question.
Cool.
So you're an artist, which I appreciate. How does art help you, really get in touch with God on a deeper level? How does it call you out? Why is art important in the midst of this contemplative journey?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like I said, I've had this, I've always been so enriched and filled and taught, particularly in films, but also other art experiences, plays, a lot of times, a lot of and including some like pieces in galleries as well, but a lot of just immersive experiences I've kind of gotten into and just felt like I was in the middle of this incredible world, and felt this sense of beauty and truth and presence in it, and including times that I've been able to discuss or share that experience with other people, and really feel like we're really sharing at a really deep level. And that's pretty what we've done with the Cinnabar film series when we were having it for years. Was we'd always have these incredible conversations after these films for 20-30 minutes between people who barely knew each other, talking about all kinds of like vulnerable things from their past, how they grew up, what they relate to. There's art really can open up our humanity, I think, and becomes this kind of liminal space, this encounter with the holy. And I've always had that sense, and I always had the sense that, the feeling I would get watching a film, watching it with other people, was a very similar feeling to the ones I would have like leading a meditation or praying with a group. I always had that intuition, and I've kind of been chasing that for more intentionally, kind of year by year, of seeing like how far can this go? Where is there's certainly like distinctions, and there's all kinds of like theory and philosophy we can bring into bear here. But I always had this intuition that there was a very similar experience because the Spirit was present in both. And so I just have always kind of investigated both worlds with the same sort of approach. And that's really been something that other people have resonated with as well. So there seems to be something true in that. So I just keep exploring it. And just in terms of a space for encounter that really is kind of pushing us beyond what we're familiar with in the everyday, but not necessarily what we're still like. This presence is often with us or around us in the everyday. We just don't necessarily have the eyes to see it. I think we learn more about how to live with that awareness through the way that we approach art, as well as the way that we approach, especially contemplative prayer and meditation, because there's a mystery in both. When we actually hold that mystery, then we realize it's a companion, and that's the Spirit.
I love art. Helps me see things differently, invites me to look at things differently, but also puts me in touch with humanity and kind of holds those two pieces together. And I think that's a great description, and I'm really excited. I mean, because this is about, as you say, it is about discipling. It comes out of the Creative Center for Creative Discipleship and the work that you and many others have done, but it really is about this journey we're on, encountering the mysterious and opening ourselves to the work of God and seeing things differently. And I would think that's really critical, especially in these times, like in COVID, right? When we're in this season where it feels like a freewheel, but there's this mysterious part too. How do you kind of how has this kind of played out for COVID for you?
Yeah, I mean, the most direct way was that I basically stopped working in the spring of last year because I'm all freelance video, mostly for cruise lines. So everything evaporated very quickly. And
changed,
And we ended up in just a very different space, which I had to let be what it was for a long time. Couldn't, like, there wasn't a whole lot I had control of. And I wasn't sure. It was a very different experience. I lost all my rhythms and all the ways that I usually kind of hold meaning in my life. And I had to sit with that and process and let it kind of rubber band me around. And but one thing that I started asking a lot of questions, which I always do, but I suddenly had a lot of time, especially to ask questions and real in deep of what it was I was kind of seeking, what kind of work I started asking myself, what kind of work did I really want to be doing? Where was my creativity kind of drawing me? And then especially over the summer, I had a long time away in Michigan, and I would just ask myself almost every day and journal and pray and reflect, and kind of came out with some things, and then started having some conversations with people who kind of gave me some wisdom and mentored me a little bit. And this all led to this art residency experience, which I didn't know existed until a week before the deadline. And then it kind of came up, and I kept wondering about it. And I talked to John and Bob Atchison about it, and they were immediately like, "Oh yeah, this makes perfect sense to us." And I was like, "I don't know if it makes sense to me, but let's see kind of what." And then the church came behind me and said they would support me for it, and off I went. And that became this incredibly meaningful experience that I never expected, that started to introduce me to this medium of video art that people are actually working in, including artists like Bill Viola, who has been working since the 70s, and most of his pieces have a contemplative backdrop. Like he's even got texts from Christian mystics, from Rumi, from other mystics that he's directly exploring through video. I never knew about any of this. Like I talked to a friend who actually went to like 3 different art schools and is a painter, and she said, "This kind of reminds me of Bill Viola." And went down. So all these, I just kept asking questions, and things kept kind of opening up, and I was being surprised by it, and finding this deep resonance with all these possibilities. And I mean, all of that for me just came out of, or it was sort of the journey I was on, but I feel like it was, in some ways, it was actually accelerated because the day-to-day got completely obliterated and interrupted. And while there was a lot of just trying to survive that and figure it out, there was also a lot of space for really asking questions and sitting with them and letting them lead me. and letting the Spirit sort of lead. And here we are, over a year later with me doing something like this, which I've never done.
Wow.
And seeing where it goes. Yeah.
That's a great story. And it's encouraging to hear about how the season when things got changed, you were able to find new life in the midst of it as you took time in the change to reflect. And I'm just so grateful that you're willing to share this longer journey, which has led to helping us take this step in this journey. And I look forward to seeing what's going to happen out of these 4 nights, especially this weekend. It's going to be fantastic. Invite those of you that are watching to please come. You don't need reservations. Just show up 5 to 8, Friday and Saturday down at the Reeves campus, and I know you'll be blessed. David, thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for what you're doing to lead us in being more like Christ.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for talking, and seriously, thank you to you and every leadership and everyone in the church who's always been very encouraging to me, including through this pandemic, and supporting me for the residency and supporting me for this project, which has meant a lot, and I think has kind of opened the door to something new. So I'm excited to kind of walk through it and see where it is. But that's all thanks to this family, which has really made that possible. I don't take that for granted.
Well, we will see you there, and we'll see everybody else there on Friday night or Saturday night. Thanks.